The longer you delay that day of reckoning, the worse it's going to be when you got to reckon with it. From a practical perspective, from an economic perspective, the sooner the better, right? The sooner we can, swallow the bitter tasting medicine, the sooner we can start healing from, what we got. And so, a lot of people don't get that or understand that. In fact, I suggested people listen to some of the archives of his radio show that he used to do, a shortwave radio show once a week. In fact, if you listen to him, you'll really understand where I'm coming from and how I got to, the place that I am. You'll see a lot of me and my dad.
Yep.
You can ignore this stuff about, not paying income taxes and things like that. I mean, I think my dad, I think technically he was right about his reading of the law and the Constitution, but I mean, the point of it is just to listen to his insights on economics and government and the Constitution and things like that. And, the signing ceremony for the bogus Phase 1 trade deal, he started talking about negative interest rates and, how great it was and how Europeans were so lucky that they could, be paid to borrow. And, he wants that here in America. We want negative interest rates. But then he said, but, I never understood who's dumb enough to buy all these bonds. I mean, I get, borrowing and paying a negative rate, that's a good thing. But, of course, the answer to Trump's rhetorical question is central banks. The central banks are being really dumb. But if the central banks are doing dumb things, that means they're screwing up the economy. There is going to be a price to be paid for bad monetary policy, and there's going to be a big price to be paid for negative rates. But, nominal rates are negative everywhere. I mean, every country now, the inflation rate is higher than the interest rate, even the official inflation rates. But, of course, the unofficial inflation rates are much higher than what the government admits. So everybody is getting a negative yield, which is a huge problem because nobody's going to save when you have negative real rates. And you have all kinds of crazy projects being funded that shouldn't be funded. You have a lot of businesses that shouldn't even exist that are being propped up by all this cheap money. And so the whole economy is distorted, and that means we're headed for a massive collapse when market forces ultimately try to repair the damage and reallocate resources to where they should have been. The only reason to do it is political expedience because you're simply delaying the day of reckoning. But I know that the longer you delay that day of reckoning, the worse it's going to be when you got to reckon with it.
Yep.
So from a practical perspective, from an economic perspective, the sooner the better, right? The sooner we can, swallow the bitter tasting medicine, the sooner we can start healing from, what we got. But none of the politicians want that. Wall Street doesn't want that. I mean, so everybody wants to keep the party going as long as possible. And the longer they keep it going, the more they're afraid to let it end because they know it's that much worse. So it just, everybody kicks the can down the road as long as they can. But, nobody knows when the music's going to stop. And so I was looking for tax loss at the end of 2018. And I looked at selling it, and then I ended up not selling it. I talked to Adrian Day, and he's like, well, it's really, really cheap. And I'm like, all right, I'll keep it. And I should have bought more, instead I bought, different gold stocks, and I really kicked myself because it's been a huge winner for me this year. Now I have a much bigger position because it's up 5 or 6 fold. And I'm not down in it anymore. Now I have a gain. I don't have a tax loss anymore. But yeah, I look at some of these other metals, but ultimately, gold is the main metal that I'm looking at because gold is a monetary metal. And so I'm looking for signals about what's going on in the economy, the monetary market, not a lot of the supply and demand imbalances that may exist with other metals. Again, these days I let my portfolio managers do most of the analysis. When it comes to gold stocks in particular, it's Adrian Day, and I spend a lot of time traveling, going to these conferences. I do the podcast. I try to manage some of the businesses, so I don't have, you can't do everything, right? So I don't have enough time.
Anymore.
Yeah, so I can buy the big blue chip stocks. Anybody can, maybe buy some Barrick, let me buy from Franco-Nevada, Agnico Eagle. anybody can buy those, but it doesn't take any research, you just buy them. But for the other ones, the juniors, and those type of stocks, you really got to know your stuff. And I don't have time to do that. I'm doing other things, but I trust people that are doing it, who know that, who have, been in the business for a long time, and who know a lot more about mining. Adrian's probably forgotten more about mining stocks than I know. Well, I guess it's better than the alternative. But, it's not even, the economy isn't good now that Trump's president. It's a bubble. And so would re-electing Trump make it easier to sustain the bubble? Yes. But sustaining a bubble is not a good thing. popping a bubble is a good thing. But if you look at America, in the post-Civil War era, up till maybe the beginning of the income tax and the Federal Reserve in 1913. I mean, that was the freest we've ever been as a society, and that was the most prosperous we've ever been. That was the greatest period of prosperity and economic growth for the masses, not just the rich, but for the middle class and for the poor. That was the heyday of America economic might and growth, and that was because we had limited government like the framers envisioned. We didn't have income taxes and Social Security taxes, and we didn't have, all these government rules and regulations, all these employment laws or minimum wage laws. We had freedom, and when you have freedom, you have prosperity. When you have government, right, and you lose freedom, then you lose prosperity. But unfortunately, American young people, and young people all over the world, but in America, they're educated, or not really educated, brainwashed through a government school system, which is really socialism in action. We would be much better off with free market education, where private entrepreneurs, competed with one another to deliver excellent, low-quality education instead of government monopolies, which deliver overpriced, lousy education, in quotes, to their captive audience. But when you have a bunch of socialist teachers teaching kids, they teach them socialism, and they grow up and they start voting at 18, and to know better. They're young, and they're voting with their hearts and not their intellect, not their mind. I mean, I don't know what Sanders' excuse is for being as old as he is and having never learned anything. Maybe because he never actually had a real job. He doesn't understand how the economy works. So he's like a little kid who still believes in Santa Claus. But it's very upsetting to me that socialism has taken such a strong stranglehold in the United States, and that capitalism is held in such low regard by people who have benefited from what's left of American capitalism. But the problem is the U.S. government, the Federal Reserve, especially following the financial crisis, really gave capitalism a bad name by pretending that what they were doing had something to do with capitalism when it had nothing to do with capitalism. It was all about socialism and central banking and central planning. And so because of all these bailouts and all this, a lot of people now have a bad idea of what capitalism is. And so when they say capitalism is not working, it's because we don't have capitalism. What's not working is crony capitalism. Right? It's corporatism, it's fascism. That's what we have, and that's what's not working. What would work is real free market capitalism, but the socialists don't get that. I'd rather have somebody who doesn't believe in socialism, but just spouts it because he thinks he's going to get votes. But then once he's elected, he acts more responsibly. They want socialism, even though that's never worked. Every time it's been tried, it's been an abysmal failure. Yet, of course, they don't teach that in schools. They don't teach any real history in schools. They teach a revisionist version of it.